I'm Ringo and I play the drums.
Well, I'm Paul and I play the bass.
I'm George and I play a guitar.
I'm John and I too play a guitar. Sometimes I play the fool.
The Beatles! John, Paul, George and Ringo, those Liverpool lads did so much in their short careers. Amazing songs, revolutionary albums and ginormous tours. But what people tend to forget, or maybe not know about, are their films. They were comedy stars, action heroes, whatever this is, and finally a cartoon.
Hello. See these little fellas? They're the Beatles. Inflatable Beatles. They're yours, the four of them, for just $2 and...
They were super famous and super lucrative. Everyone wanted a piece of that Beatles money. The Beatles were interested in making a film, and their manager, Brian Epstein, organised a deal with American film studio United Artists to produce 3 movies. They didn't know who the Beatles were at the time, but as soon as the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show in America,
ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
And really exploded, they knew they were in the money. They weren't too bothered with how the film would turn out, because they knew the real money was in the Beatles' music. Capitol Records held the Beatles' music distribution rights, but not the soundtrack rights, as this was United Artists' way into that sweet, sweet Beatles money. So they rushed into production and hired writer Alan Owen, producer Walter Shenson, and director Richard Lester.
I was never a theatre director. I was always, the expression is a kick, bollock and scramble man. It's just trying to get myself out of trouble.
Richard Lester was experienced with comedy, bringing the Goon Show from radio to television, and he was efficient with low budgets and quick deadlines through the commercial industry. United Artists gave them a small budget of £200,000 and told them to make it quick, because they thought, like many at the time, that the Beatles bubble would soon burst. Musical films were the crowning jewel of Hollywood at the time.
The hills are alive with the sound of music.
With Elvis having his fair share in the US.
Of course, he has a big sweetheart, too. Several of them, in fact.
1 minute, there's something in this eye, and the next minute, there's something in this eye.
He's got something in his eye, all right.
With films like King Creole and Blue Hawaii. And in the UK, we had Summer Holidays starring Cliff Richard.
In the driver's seat is Cliff Richard. On the upper deck, stowaway Laurie Peters, and he's a girl.
They were products of the Hollywood system, where the big studios, and not the directors, had control over filmmaking. They had big set pieces, flashy lights, generic storylines, the boy gets the girl, or the boy gets the boy.
Just for the record, I've loved you ever since I was a little boy.
It wasn't what the Beatles, Alan Owen or Richard Lester wanted, or could afford. But what we got was so much better.
1, 2, 3, 4. That's not it. 1, 2, 3, 4.
After a quick, cheap and difficult 16-week production schedule, A Hard Day's Night was released in the heights of Beatlemania to great success in July 1964. So, what's it about? I guess you can call it a pseudo-documentary about the Beatles in the middle of Beatlemania. It follows them over a day of their madcap lives as they try to escape and get some peace and quiet from the tight schedule of screaming fans, nonsensical interviewers, managers' orders, rehearsing, and all leading up to the televised performance at the end. Oh, and they also have to deal with Paul's mischievous grandfather.
Well, you got me here, so do your worst. Or be God, I'll take one of you with me. I know your game.
Though there is a small amount of narrative as the Beatles rehearse for the performance at the end, it's more so a bunch of comedy sketches, centred around just another crazy day in the Beatles' lives. When writing the script, Alan Owen didn't write the Beatles to be heroes or perfect romantics. He spent time with the Beatles to get their famous humour, lingo and experiences. Unlike other musicians in films, the Beatles don't take themselves seriously. And comparing Beatles on TV at the time, you can tell Alan Owen got them perfectly. The Beatles were very funny, and you could easily splice this footage into the film and it would make sense.
What do you think of the comment that you're nothing but a bunch of British Elvis Presley?
Oh, it's not true, it's not true.
They think your haircuts are un-American.
Well, it was very observant of them, because we aren't American, actually.
What kind of girls do you prefer?
My wife.
Your wife. What kind of girl is she?
She's a nice girl.
What kind of girl do you like? John's wife.
John's wife, totally not such a plan.
Being it was their first time acting, they were quite nervous. They make some mistakes here and there, but it adds to the realism, and also it's cute. It allows them to be the zany, silly selves they are, which drew critics to compare the Beatles to the Marx Brothers and Charlie Chaplin. Each Beatle has their own scene to shine, apart from Paul's, who was cut. Ringo temporarily leaves the Beatles, John has a case of mistaken identity, and George is seen as a parody of the fashion industry. Lester found George Harrison to fit in Best Acting, and I think he has great line delivery.
Here's this kid trying to give me his utterly valueless opinion when I know for a fact that within a month he'll be suffering from a violent inferiority complex and loss of status because he isn't wearing one of these nasty things. Of course they're grotty, you wretched nit. That's why they were designed, but that's what you'll want.
I won't.
You can be replaced, Chicky baby.
I don't care.
Ringo has the most characterization. He's the victim of teasing and he's quite a sympathetic character.
Do I snore, John?
Yeah, you're a window rattler, son.
It's just your opinion. Do I snore, Paul?
With a trombone hooter like yours, it'd be unnatural if you didn't.
In his own extended scene of when he leaves the Beatles, he received a lot of praise for his comedic and melancholic acting. Turns out he had just come from a night of heavy drinking and was quite hungover. But hey, weather works. The characters opposite the Beatles all play their parts well, as the goofy characters or the authority figures. Like the old man on the train.
And we'll have that thing off as well, thank you. But an elementary knowledge of the Railway Act would tell you that I'm perfectly within my rights.
The television director.
Now look, if you think I'm unsuitable, let's have it out in the open. I can't stand these backstage politics.
Aren't you turning to black and white the situation somewhat?
Well, quite honestly, I wasn't expecting a musical arranger to question my ability picture-wise.
I could listen to him for hours.
And the ever-stressed Beatles manager, who has to deal with not only his bumbling assistant, but also the misbehaving Beatles.
Come at you lot, try to act with a bit of decorum. This is a posh place. We know how to behave, we've had lessons.
I'm sorry, sir. Members and invited guests only.
Ah, well,
Oh, yes.
I'm with them. I'm Ringo's sister.
Paul's grandfather works hilariously well as the source of comedic conflict, and he causes a lot of trouble for everyone involved.
I thought I was supposed to be getting a change of scenery, and so far I've been in a train and a room, and a car and a room, and a room and a room. Well, maybe that's all right for a bunch of powdered geegaws like you lot, but I'm feeling decidedly straitjacketed.
What a clean old man.
Ah, don't pressure, look.
You can really see that the script Alan Owen wrote and the direction from Richard Lester got them down to a B. Not only did they accentuate the Beatles' humour and charm, but also their rebelliousness.
What about all this talk that you represent some kind of a social rebellion?
It's a dirty lie.
Richard Lester said this about the Beatles. The general aim of the film was to present what was apparently becoming a social phenomenon in this country. Anarchy is too strong a word, but the quality of confidence that the boys exuded, confidence that they could dress as they liked, speak as they liked, everything was still based on privilege. Privileged by schooling, privileged by birth, privileged by accent, privileged by speech. The Beatles were the first people to attack this. They said if you want something, do it. Forget all this talk about talent or ability or money or speech. Just do it. This was John talking to the Queen at the Royal Variety Performance in November 1963.
Thank you. For our last number, I'd like to ask your help. With the people in the cheaper seats, clap your hands. And the rest of you, if you just rattle your jewelry.
And throughout their careers, their songs get scrutinized too.
A recent article, Time magazine put down pop music, and they referred to Day Tripper as being about a prostitute, and Norwegian Wood as being about a lesbian. Now, I just wanted to know what your intent was when you wrote it, and what your feeling is about the Time magazine criticism of the music that is being written today.
Well, you're just trying to write songs about prostitutes and lesbians, that's all.
They would go on later to voice their opinions on greater societal issues. They were against segregation in America. They were outspoken against the Vietnam War. And John and Yoko performed their famous Begging for Peace. The Beatles were a big part of the ongoing counterculture in the 1960s, where the young were gaining their own voice, their own culture in music, films, art, clothing. And A Hard Day's Night reflected this period.
by using a multiple camera technique, I was able to allow people the freedom to move, to go where they want as far as possible. No mark should be given to anybody. No one should have to hit a mark or sit to the center of their chairs. It was just, you do what you want to do, we'll go out in the field and have a play, and then we would find a way to turn it into a little sequence. The difficulty with this is that some 3 or 4 years later, you're asked to go to a film school in Copenhagen or Helsinki, and they put that sequence on for the students to watch, and then proceed to tell you why you did these shots and what significance they had. And it's extremely impolite to tell them the truth. So that in the end, this kind of myth builds up, that you really knew what you were doing and that you had some control over this madhouse.
He didn't mean to change the game, but Lester did. It was a signal of change where the director had more of a voice, not the big studios. The lack of budget and time works for Lester. It's exciting, unconventional and anti-Hollywood. It was compared to the cinema verite in its documentary style of filmmaking, where it's shot on actual locations, with handheld camera work, quick cutting and unconventional framing.
I know your game.
It's realistic, but there's also a large surreal element.
Hey, mister, can we have our ball back? Mister, keep going. We have our ball back. Hey,
Where they defy physics and break the fourth wall.
Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt.
Zap!
This recreates the claustrophobia and chaos the Beatles felt during Beatlemania, being rushed around and stuck in hotel rooms. But also shows how they dealt with it, being beside one another and finding humour where they can.
Aww.
Now you can't talk about the Beatles without talking about the Beatles' music. The songs aren't quite as flashy as other musicals.
Summer Holiday, the song-studded spectacular that's gloriously gay and deliciously young.
You know I shouldn't be surprised that gasket hood looks pulverized.
But Lester uses influence from his previous work, directing the 1962 musical film Trad Dad, where the low budget and creative filmmaking is an inspiration for the musical scenes in A Hard Day's Night. And this is how the film opens, with one of the most famous opening chords in music, A Hard Day's Night. We're thrown right into the middle of what being a Beatle is like, and you instantly get the idea of what Lester's going for. Frenetic, fun and different. The next song, I Should Have Known Better, continues this. It's a little pop song that rocks along to the swaying train. The Beatles aren't on any fancy stage, they're trapped in a cage, replicating the imprisonment of their own fame. The songs If I Fell and I'm Happy Just to Dance With You capture the Beatles' playful side of music as they enjoy themselves around the theatre, whilst the slower love song, And I Love Her, showcases the Beatles' sincere side, with moody lighting and extreme close-ups. Richard Lester was a big fan of Buster Keaton, and in the 2 times Can't Buy Me Love was played, you can see the influence.
I'm going to keep you in, even after put the lock in the key and turn it. We're out!
The first time it's played is a burst of excitement. The Beatles have escaped and finally enjoying themselves. They improvise and run amok, the sped-up footage being influenced by mistaking the camera. The second time it's played is the soundtrack to a clever cartoon-like chase scene between the Beatles and the police.
What is all this? Are you all right now?
The climax of the film is a musical extravaganza. The Beatles free Ringo from the police and just make it to the televised performance. Richard Lester had 6 camera operators running with free rein in the midst of the crowd and the band. What he achieved is a precursor to how modern concerts are filmed. The Beatles would go on to pioneer the music video, and Richard Lester paved the way with his creative and inventive ideas in the film. It's no wonder that Lester received an award from MTV in 1984 as the father of the music video for his work on A Hard Day's Night and Help.
I'd like to say thank you all very much for coming along. It was lovely. Thank you.
When United Artists saw the film, they hadn't seen anything like it. One of the executives said, "I don't know what that was about, but I think we're going to make a lot of money." And they did. Their faith paid off as the film made over £8 million at the box office, from its small £200,000 budget. Fans loved it, obviously, and the film received glowing reviews for its inventive filmmaking and surreal and fresh humour. John Lennon said, "What really delighted us more than anything is that everybody from the top knobs down to the humblest scouser has been so nice and friendly and sung praise after praise, which I'm sure we don't really deserve." It was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, Alan Owen for Best Screenplay and George Martin for Best Score. It was the first film to have a soundtrack equally as successful as the film, with the album lasting #1 in the UK for 21 weeks and 18 weeks in the US. It popularised the accompanying soundtrack with many, 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 many films following this format. The Beatles, Richard Lester and everybody involved managed to turn what was meant to be pure exploitation into a game-changing feature of silliness, surrealism and rebelliousness that was emblematic of the growing 1960s counterculture. The success of A Hard Day's Night would lead to a follow-up a year later, but to a slightly different outcome.
The Beatles break out on home video in the wildest, wackiest, madcap Beatles adventure.
Something must be done.
Help! The movie.